Hello students, this is Aanshul Sadaria, Software Engineer 3 at Google. In this video, I am going to talk about APIs. Yes, you heard it right, API, Application Programming Interface. I am sure you must have heard this term a lot of times and you must have wondered what this actually means. Surprisingly, you must have worked with a lot of APIs even without knowing you are working with it. If you want to learn such amazing technical content, make sure you check out free masterclasses on Scalar's event page. Link is in the description below. By the time this tutorial ends, apart from just knowing the full form of API, which is Application Programming Interface, you will also learn how to explore different APIs and why APIs are so powerful in the tech industry. How you can get started with an API, how you can build amazing products just using the APIs available online. So, without further ado, let's jump into it. Before we begin the tutorial, I just want to share some of the prerequisites to understand this video. Don't worry, I am just assuming you have little bit of knowledge about coding and a little bit of understanding about how the web works. Even if you don't know a particular programming language, it's absolutely fine. Until you know how to write a simple hello world program in any of the programming languages, you are ready for this course. Now, the weird and good part about educational content is that for some people, I might be too slow. But for some, they would be like, I don't know what he was speaking. He was just blabbering all along. So, just reduce or increase the playback speed as per your comfort and it will be great. If you don't understand any concept in this video, feel free to add them in the comment section. I would be very happy to answer each and every doubt. Now, to understand any acronym, I feel, this is my personal opinion, the best practice is to understand what each of the individual letters mean. A, application, P, programming, I, interface. I think the most fun one over here is interfaces. So let's touch upon some interfaces. Did you see my wordplay over here? Touch upon interface. Yeah, I'm really sorry, you might have to bear with my jokes here and there. Let's start with the control panel on our cars that we must have frequently interacted with. There are so many interfaces on the control panel of the car. You can increase or decrease the temperature of the AC. You can tune into a particular radio channel by just pushing a button. You can also lock and unlock the car. You know what's the most beautiful part about it? You don't need to know how it's working. Honestly, I don't know how just turning a knob increases or decreases the temperature of the AC, and I don't need to know. We must also have interacted with switches in our day-to-day life. To be honest, 7 years after clearing my JEE, I don't remember how the circuits work. But I don't need to know as well. All I need to know is how to turn the switch on and off. That's it. Now, these interfaces evolve a lot over the time. Back in the 90s when I was born, there were radios where you turned the knob and tuned into the frequencies. These were replaced by radios with push buttons like the ones which we have in the car. We can just press next or the number 1, 2, 3 to tune into the specific radio channel. These were further replaced by radios which can be operated using remote control, either through your mobile phones with Bluetooth or using a physical remote control. Now, the best part about these interfaces is that back in the 2000s, I didn't know how turning a knob actually tuned into the frequency I was looking for. Back in the 2010s, I didn't know how pressing a button was turning into the radio channel I was looking for. Even now, I don't understand how Bluetooth works or how the remote control tunes into the frequency I was looking for. And I don't even need to. There are something which are known as physical interfaces, like the push buttons on the control panel of the car or even the remote control which you are using to press a particular radio channel. But if you are using a mobile phone to interact with some devices, it is known as GUI, which is Graphical User Interface, where the user just interacts with the graphics on the screen of your mobile phones or laptops or your iPads or any of the device you are working with. Let's have a look what happens, like how the developer would have implemented that graphical user interface. Now let's see how the developer must have implemented the graphical user interface. They must have used an event handler, something known as onClick, onPress or something like that. They didn't need to implement the logic of how to receive or listen the clicks. They could just use it using the abstraction provided by exactly APIs. They didn't need to implement the entire logic of how to receive or listen the clicks. They just used the API provided by onClick and it worked absolutely fine. Now, to tune into a particular frequency, they must have used another API, which must be something like this: radio.setFrequency. Okay, I'm not sure what the API is provided by, so I'm just giving a vague example. Here also they are using an interface API to set the frequency to 98.3. That's my favorite radio channel. So what happens when you are using APIs is that you delegate, you take the luggage off from yourself and delegate the task to some other APIs which are provided. So what happens is that the developer didn't require to understand how to receive or listen the clicks. The developer didn't even implement how to tune into a particular frequency. They just used the APIs which were already provided and added some glue and magic to it and wove an implementation around it. So that's how powerful APIs actually are. So the UI, which is the user interface, is meant to make lives easier for the users. What the API does is that it helps to avoid recreating the wheel for the developers and makes the life easier for them. I am sure as developers you must have worked with print statements a lot every day in your programming life. So let's have a look at some of these interfaces which you would have worked with. For Python, it will be print text. Let's keep it a random text. Okay, Python doesn't have a semicolon. I just forgot about it. For C, it's printf. Let's keep it text only. We do have a semicolon over here. If we are using C++, we have something known as cout. Now, the best part about this is that I know how to use these APIs. Okay, each one of these are APIs. Print, printf, cout, all of these are APIs. I know how to use them, but I don't know how the implementation behind the scene works. How printf or print actually prints those statements, those debug lines, and prints the output on the screen. And I don't even need to, because we all know developers are lazy. Most of the developers are lazy, and I am among the laziest ones. So I never cared to understand how actually the printf statement worked. What I did was I looked upon what this API is, how this API works, like what input it should receive and what output it will give to me, and voila, this is how it works. I don't even need to understand how the implementation for printf or cout works behind the scenes. Now, these APIs are a sort of contract between two developers. It's an understanding between both of them, what input the developer should expect to accept and what output the other developer should expect in the response. Now, to understand this contracts in a bit more detail, let's take a complicated example. When I was in my first year, we were taught a lot of different sorting algorithms: bubble sort, insertion sort, merge sort, quick sort, and so on. We were supposed to write the entire implementation of these sorting algorithms in our coding practical exams. In the second year, I realized that, okay, there is an abstraction provided in the standard template library. Here I am talking about the C++ language, wherein you can use a sort API to sort the entire data structure without having to write the entire implementation. So let's take a look what that API is in the standard template library for C++. Now here I am using an array and referring it as arr. Now what the contract for the sort API suggests is that the first parameter should point to the beginning of the data structure. Here it's an array. It can be a vector as well. So it points to the first part of the data structure from where the sorting should begin. The second parameter points to the end of the data structure till which the sorting should be implemented. So if, for example, let's say I use something like this. Okay, I just give it a single parameter. Do you think this should work? Let me know in the comment section. Because the contract clearly states that there should be two parameters. If I pass just a single parameter, I cannot expect the sort function to sort me the entire array. Let's take an example, okay? Let me just scribble some random numbers. Okay, so for example, if I'm using the sort function in this particular way, I'm using air plus 2 as the starting pointer. Now, what this statement will do is that it will pick up the data structure from the second index and then sort it till the end. Here, n is the number of elements in the data structure. So, what it will do is it will just sort these portion of the data structure for me. So, how the output will look like? It will not touch 3 and 2, it will just sort the last 4 elements from the data structure. So if I have not read the contract properly and I expect that okay, this particular statement should sort the entire array for me, I am doing something wrong. So this is why the contracts are so important to read and understand before you start using a particular API. Now let me take an example of the Python API which I have frequently worked with. It's the sort API itself. It looks something like this. Now here array is the data structure on which I am implementing the sort part. I just need to mention the data structure. It can be air, it can be v, it can be a, however you want to implement the data structure, and just do dot sort for it. It works amazingly. But as a beginner, how would I know if there exists an API to perform this abstraction for me? As a beginner, I would think such an API doesn't exist. So I need to implement or perform the entire implementation of the sort function on my own. So as if you are a beginner, I was a beginner once upon a time as well. So I would recommend you to go through the documentation of a particular programming language. Here we are talking about Python. So let's see if I can find the sort algorithm or the sort API in the documentation of Python. Now let's hit the internet to see what the sorting API for Python looks like. Now here we can see the first result which was given to us is the official Python documentation. So whenever you want to see some contract, some sort of documentation, how an API is used, I would recommend you to check out the official documentations only. If they are not available, it's fine to check out some other blogs which are written by technical writers. So here I can see there is one offering which is sorted, in which I can, like as a parameter, I can pass on the data structure. Here it's a list. So it just says a simple ascending sort is very easy, just call sorted. It returns a new sorted list. Okay. Here it's important to understand it doesn't mutate the existing parameter. Whatever parameter we passed in, it doesn't mutate that. Okay. It returns a new list which is the sorted one. So if you are doing sorted x, it's not going to mutate x. If you want to use the sorted list, you can add in a new variable which is y is equal to sorted x. Okay. Now there's the sort function, the sort API that I was actually looking for. If you look over here, we are declaring a variable with a random list and we are using a.sort. So it says that, okay, you can also use the list.sort method. It modifies the list in place. Here what it means is that it mutates the parameter a, it mutates that particular class itself, rather than creating a new sorted list. So we need to understand what the contract is for both of these APIs, what our requirement is, and based upon that, we can use whichever API we want to use. Now I'm just curious to see what all different built-in functions are there for C++. Let's check if there is an existing documentation for that or not. Okay, so here it's the C++ standard template library. There is no official document in the top few results. Let me just have a look through this. Okay, so these are the different standard template libraries which are available. We can see this is the math library. For example, let's just have a look at the exponential function, how it works as. So it says that the exponential function takes a single argument and returns the exponential value in type double, float or long double. So okay, this is a contract. If I am going to use exponential and then pass a string to it, it's going to return some error while compilation. And we need to understand what different output it returns. If I want to convert it into int, it's not going to give me an integer. I need to typecast the double, float or long double to int if I want to use it as an integer. But exponentials are not integers, as we know. So it mentions the exponential function takes in a single mandatory argument and can be any value, that is negative, positive or 0. Here they have not explicitly mentioned that it accepts numbers only, we cannot pass in strings. That could have been mentioned, but I guess it's a math function, so the developers or the user of this particular API would have some understanding of how exponential function works. The return value, the response of exp function, it returns the value in the range of 0 to infinity. So this is how it's an example is also given that how we can use this particular function. This is great. So I think we can go through this documentation which is provided over here if we want to understand the functioning of any API whatsoever. Okay, let's say we must have used floor and seal functions a lot. So if you want to understand the contract, we can just go to this particular page and have a look what input can be given, how the syntax is. Okay, so here it clearly mentions the sealing function accepts a double parameter. We cannot pass a string or any XYZ, a list or anything like that. We need to pass a double parameter. So if you take a look, the seal syntax, what it suggests is that the input parameter is a double value and not an integer. It's not a string, it cannot accept a string, it cannot accept list or anything like that as well. We need to pass a double parameter. Here it says num is a floating point number whose sealing value is supposed to be computed. And when you look at the response that the seal function gives, it's the smallest possible integer value greater than or equal to num. Once I have understood the contract given by this API, I can comfortably use this particular API or function or whatever you want to call it as. Don't you think it's brilliant that whatever code we write for different web browsers, it works for all of them since the beginning of the internet? There are so many web browsers, starting with Internet Explorer, Mozilla Firefox, Google Chrome, Brave, Safari and so on. Our code works on each and every one of them. It is because all the web browsers are supposed to create some common web APIs, taking the stress away from the developers and help them avoid recreating the wheel. We are sitting on the shoulders of the giants, and I think we should be very, very thankful to all the developers who contributed in developing this web-based APIs and also to the technical writers who are maintaining this amazing contracts and documentations as we know it. Let's take a small water break and then we will come and explain what remote APIs are and what this beautiful, powerful beast is about. Remember when I said we can now control radio using a remote? I am interacting with the remote, the interface it's somewhere else, and the processing, the logic which handles whether to increase or decrease the volume or whether to change a radio frequency, that works somewhere else completely. That's the beauty, that's the power of remote APIs. It takes away the responsibility of processing away from the client. For example, I have a smart light at my home. I can just sit on the bed and using the mobile phone, I can change the temperature of the light. I can also change the intensity of the light. I'm interacting with the light using my mobile phone while sitting on my bed, and the light which is somewhere else, it's changing the intensity, it's changing the frequency. Isn't that amazing? Now let's say I want to search a particular file in my mobile phone. That is not an example of a remote API because the files exist on my mobile phone and the logic to search through the files in the file system also exists in the mobile phone. Now, for example, you want to search for some music. Let's say you are using Spotify or any other music streaming service. The song doesn't exist on your mobile phone. It exists somewhere in the cloud where the logic to search the song happens and it returns the song which you are looking for. Most of the time when you are interacting with the internet, you are most likely using a remote API where the processing happens somewhere else, but you are interacting on your mobile phone sitting at your desk at your home. There was a time when people were developing APIs with their own sense of architectural style. For example, I was developing APIs with my own set of constraints, with my own set of standards. My friend, for example, is developing his own API with a different architectural style which is meaningful to him. At that time, all the people, the producers and consumers of the API were not happy because there was no common standard which was accepted and loved by everyone. But gradually the battle was won, the goal was achieved. Around in 2000s, there was a group of software engineers which created an architectural style which was clear, and it gave the much needed abstraction to interact with the resources over the internet. Yes, I am talking about REST. It stands for Representational State Transfer. It is so commonly used nowadays that we confuse REST for APIs, just like we confused Xerox for photocopiers or Colgate for toothpaste. It is a set of constraints which an API can fulfill to be called a RESTful API. No, I'm not going to explore all of these constraints in detail in this particular video. It is going to be your homework when we explore some APIs down the lane in this particular tutorial. Let me know what these constraints are, and then you can identify whether these APIs are RESTful APIs or not. Let's move on to the exciting part of this video where we will explore some APIs over the internet. Now the API which I'm most excited to explore is the ChatGPT OpenAI API. You must have heard a lot about it because it's very much in the trend now. People are saying that it's going to revolutionize the entire artificial intelligence domain. So let's take a look what the API looks like. We first need to log in. Okay, we are waiting till it loads up. Now that we have logged in, let's take a look at the API. Okay, so these are some of the offerings. It says text completion, code completion. If you can look over here, it says limited beta, which means that the feature is not launched for everyone to be used. It's currently in trials. So is the image generation part. Let's take a look at the documentation about some of these APIs. So if you want to use it in Python, it says here that you can install this if you want to run it in the form of a Python application. If you want to use it in Node.js, if you are using Node.js as your backend framework, you can install it using npm install OpenAPI. I just love reading the documentations. It also explains like how you can use authentication. It uses a bearer token over here. It also gives an example of what the curl command should actually look like, how I can add authorization in the headers for this particular API, and so on. Now, before we start to explore this API in particular, I just want to play around. Like I was very curious to play around with this particular application. Okay, so here the example suggests there are a few examples: grammatical standard English, summarize for a second grader, translate it from English to other languages, classification, and so on. Now let's take a look at what different offerings are there for the ChatGPT API. Grammatical standard English, which means it will give me corrections for the wrong grammars or wrong English that I'm using. Summarize for a second grader is pretty cool. I mean, for example, if someone has a small kid and they want to explain them a complicated topic, they can perhaps use this API to summarize it for a toddler or a small kid. English to other languages as well. I think if I remember correctly, I read somewhere that Duolingo, which is the other language learning application, it was somewhere using the GPT-3 AI. It is somewhere using the GPT-3 API, which is provided by OpenAI itself. I can translate the code using my natural language to Python as well. Okay, let's not get distracted. Let's start with the grammatical standard English offering. So it says correct this to standard English, and then we can mention the sentence for which we want the correct English. Let's try to use this example itself and see what output it returns to us. So now we have got the response. If you see, our input was she no went to the market, which is obviously incorrect. And the correct response was she didn't go to the market. Let me add a more complicated bit of example. which doesn't make sense at all. I want to play football, okay, I don't mean foosball over here, this week, okay. There are a lot of grammatical inconsistencies throughout this sentence, and let's see if this API can resolve or fix this grammar completely or not. Okay, so it interpreted foosball as foosball because obviously it cannot know what my intent is, because foosball is also one such sport which I love playing a lot in my office. It corrected want, it corrected to, it corrected play, this and week. It's really amazing, isn't it? Now, there are a lot of parameters on the right side of the screen: model, temperature, maximum length, and so on. I really don't understand what each of them means. So let's take a look at the documentation which we ignored earlier. As I mentioned before as well, if you want to use an API, make sure you read the contract first to understand what the input are and what output we should be expecting for this particular API. Let's close the previous tabs and again open the OpenAI API. We want to read the documentation. So if we look again at the example, it was using completion. If we see over here, it was completing the sentence that we had mentioned. So it's a part of the completions API. If you look over here, it's using the post method, which is an HTTP verb. If you want to know what all other HTTP verbs are there, search it over the internet. There is get, post, put, delete, and so on. There are lots of HTTP verbs. For this particular API, which is the completions API, it is using the post HTTP verb. It mentions it creates a completion of the provided prompts and parameters. Now, if we want to take a look what the request body looks like, now here, since it's a post request, our request should be mentioned in the body instead of the parameters. So the request body will contain model, which is a required parameter. It's a required part of the body. It is a string. We can use this particular API if we want to know what all models are there. We will skip that for a moment. There are prompt for which we want to generate the completions. For example, in this case, the prompt was correct this to standard English. I want to play foosball this week. Okay, that was the prompt, and the completion was I want to play foosball this week. Now, temperature seems to be interesting. Higher values mean the model will take more risk. Try 0.9 for more creative applications and 0 for the ones with a well-defined answer. Okay, there are a lot of options which we can play around with as a part of the request body. We cannot obviously go through each and every one of them, but I now have some sort of an idea of what each and every one of these important parameters in the request body mean. For example, max token, the maximum number of tokens to generate in the completion. So for example, if I change the max token over here, okay, I think it's the maximum length. Yes, maximum number of tokens to generate. So for example, if instead of 60, I would have used 6, I think the answer should be something different. I want to play. Okay, this is amazing because it restricted itself to 6 tokens itself. I don't really know what the exact definition of token is, but you can check it up. So this is how you can play around with different parameters for a particular API to get different sort of results. Now the one which I'm interested in is summarize for a second grader. Yep, we can discard these changes. I don't want to use this particular prompt. Now we understand that this was a particular prompt which we need to give in order to get some sort of completion. So there is prompt and then we get some completion. Let me use Wikipedia to find some complicated 10 standard dispersion of light. I think it's a 10 standard concept. I don't really remember, but we can use the Wikipedia explanation and try to see what this particular API returns in the form of a response. Okay, let's just copy paste some text. Okay, this is the reference and here is a playground. I have copy pasted something. Let's increase the maximum length. I'm not sure how many tokens are there, but just for the sake of safety, I'm keeping it somewhere around 1000, which should be sufficient for us. Okay, this is amazing. It just translated around 10 to 15 lines into 2 to 3 lines. Light can be split up into different colors like a rainbow. This is because different colors of light bend at different angles. I'm not sure if a second grader can understand what angles are, but anyways, at different angles when they pass through a prism, this bending of light is called dispersion. It can also happen with sound, ocean waves and other kind of waves. When dispersion happens, it causes a loss of energy in the wave. I am sure the second grader won't be able to understand this, but it is really amazing to see the power of this API through which it was able to summarize it. Now just to have a look at the last type of API. Okay, now I am interested to see how does the temperature influence the result that we get. Okay. Let's increase the temperature to 0.9. If you notice over here in the contract, it mentions that the temperature defaults to 1 and the maximum value is 1 itself, like it should be between 0 and 1. So let us see, for earlier it was 0.9, now it's 0. Okay, earlier it was 0.7, now it's 0.9. Let's take a look if it gives us a more creative answer or not, because it mentioned that as the temperature increases, it's going to be more risk taking. Definitely, the answer is something different. Light can bend and change directions when it goes through different materials or objects. This is clearly a second grader answer. Some materials bend the light more than others and cause different colors to spread out. This is called dispersion. This is a brilliant answer which I think a second grader can definitely understand. So playing around with different parameters, you can really understand what the power of a particular API is. Now going through the last one, which I was interested in since I am a developer, it's natural language to Python. Just imagine a person who is not a software engineer using his own natural language ability, able to translate something into Python just by using English. Now we are not going to use the prompt that they have provided. Let's change it to something like take 2 integer inputs from the user and return the product of them. I'm not sure if it's able to understand this or not, but I'm really curious to see the output. The model doesn't exist. So it says that code DaVinci 003, it doesn't work for this particular API. So I think Codex is the API which is used for all the coding related, code completion related models. So I'm not sure what the difference between each of these model is. You can read the description. For the sake of my curiosity, I'm going to choose any one of them and then see what the output is. This was amazing. Okay, I know this was a very simple example, but it created a definition product. It took both the numbers as the input and it also printed the product of both the numbers. This is amazing. I would definitely want to use something like this because I am very, very lazy. Now, this was all about the ChatGPT API, which I was really curious to explore. One other interest of mine is just browsing through different sort of music. So the API that we are going to explore next is the Spotify music streaming API. Let's see. Okay, there is an API provided. I really love when the products care about the developers and expose such amazing documentation. So if you read over here, it's a web-based API. So for different type of applications, I think there should be something for iOS as well. Okay, let's restrict ourselves to web-based API and go through it. Based on simple REST principles, so it clearly mentions over here that this API follows the REST constraints. Based on simple REST principles, the Spotify web API endpoints return JSON metadata about music artists, albums and tracks directly from the Spotify data catalog. So this is my application. It uses this web-based API to interact with Spotify. So if I'm using a Spotify application, it uses these APIs to return me the results which I'm looking for. Either it's searching for some artist or searching for some particular album or streaming the music altogether. So if you remember, I mentioned earlier that there are different HTTP verbs which are used. The one we had a look at for ChatGPT, it was the post verb. There are other methods as well, like get, put and delete, which can be used for all of these APIs. The response web API responses normally include a JSON object. We can browse through the reference documentation to find the description. Okay, I think there was somewhere, yeah. Here is the reference that I was looking for. Let's see if okay. In order to make a successful web API request, your app will need a valid access token. As we had a look in the previous API as well, we had to use an API token, which was possible because I was already logged into the particular application. Let's take a look back at the OpenAI method to see what the code was. Now let's actually check what the code is to understand where we are using the token. This is the Python deliverable. So if someone is building an application in Python, they can just copy it from here and explore this particular API. I am interested in the curl one. So here if you see, they are using OpenAI API key. They have just abstracted it. They are using the environment variable, and the OpenAI API key must be stored somewhere else so that it's not exposed when I'm teaching over here. Sharing my screen, it's not exposed to all of you. So here in the header for authorization, we are using a bearer token. If we explore Spotify as well, it mentions that we will need a valid access token from our app to make successful web API request. Now let's take a look at some of these APIs. What I'm interested over here is to explore some of my favorite songs. So let's go to the tracks part. There is album. Okay, I think the tracks one should be the one which I'm looking for. These are all the methods which we can use to interact with tracks in different way. Get track should probably return the track which I'm looking for. There are some amazing methods which we can use. Let's start one by one. I think this documentation is just brilliant because it mentions in a single page with an example of curl and the response. It tells me in the request it's a get method where the ID should be the Spotify ID of the track. Now the track that I'm looking for is the Kun Fire track of Rockstar movie. I'm not really sure what the Spotify ID is, so we will need to have a look where I can get this Spotify ID from. But if you take a look, this is the query. In the query, it includes market. So over here, if my market, for example, for the Rockstar movie, the market is going to be India. So possibly the market string should be IN, which stands for India. Here it's showing an example of ES, which most likely is for Spain. I'm not too sure, we can take a look over here, but for me it's India and I'm sure it's IN, so we can go ahead. We can explore this body as well, but my first task is to identify how I can get this Spotify ID. So I think we can take a look at the search method as well, search for an item. So this item can possibly be tracks or artist or anything. Okay, so over here it says the query. If you see, it's a get request. The query has Q, which is your search query, and the available filters are album, artist, track, year. Okay, there are so many filters which we can use. In the type, we can mention what the allowed values are. So over here, it clearly mentions in the contract that these are the allowed values. If we use any value out of the given allowed values, it's not going to return us the correct answer. Also, we can use a comma separated list. For example, if I'm looking for Arijit Singh, then with Arijit, I can mention album, artist, show, track, all the Arijits which I'm looking for. Again, over here, there is market which says it should be IN for us. And in the response, it returns the link to the web API endpoint. Okay, we can explore over here if I'm getting the ID or not for this. I think we can take a look at the console if it exists. Yes, they have given us the playground as well, just like we used in the ChatGPT platform. So what I was looking for was the search. Yes, I'm looking for an item, and let's start with Kunfaya. I don't really know the spelling of it, but if you take a look over here, it's changing the curl request as well. If you see, instead of space, it just encoded it to %20. So if you're using a curl request, then we should not put a space in between. Rather than we should add a encoded query. Now the type for this should be track because it was not an album. We can ignore market as well. If you see over here, Q and type, both of them are required parameters and market is an optional one. But I want to get specific answers, so I will add market as well. If you look over here, the OAuth token is already mentioned over here because I am logged into the Spotify API. So let's see what output it returns to us. Loading. Okay, we have got the output. It says the access token expired. So let's try to modify our access token. We will request the token. This is a contract which I need to agree in order to get the token. Let's try again with the updated token. Now instead of the error message, we should get the correct answer. Yes, we have got the response. Our query was Kunfaya, and yeah, Kunfaya was our query. The type was track and the market was India. Let's see what items we have retrieved out of this. If you see, I have some ID as well, which is for the album. So if you look over here in the response, the external URL shows a Spotify URL. So if you just copy this particular URL and paste it over here, it should probably open me the particular album. Page not available. I'm not sure why this didn't work, but let's just explore further. Okay, so here it says the name of the album is Rockstar. It also mentions the release date and all the other information about it. It adds the information about the artist as well, which was A.R. Rahman. And here we get the information about the track. So we were looking for the ID of the track in order to query it, and it mentions the ID which we can copy. The name of the song is Kun Faya Kun. It also mentions the popularity. So let's just explore the APIs added in the tracks part to see if we can query the particular track or not. Now we have the ID over here. The ID is going to be a primary key for the tracks. So even if I don't mention market India, I think it should definitely work because no two tracks are going to have the same ID. We have got the output. Album type, artist, it mentions A.R. Rahman. So yes, definitely we have got the correct answer. These are the available markets in which the song can be is available in Spotify. There are some other informations about the artist and tracks and so on. Yeah, I got the song. So this is how I can use this particular API to interact and query for the tracks. Now one API which just caught my attention was the audio analysis. Let's just have a look what audio analysis looks like. We can query for the same track and try it again. Okay, it mentions some of the information related to the track. I was looking for something more interesting. I guess the audio features should contain some interesting stuff which I can build an application on. All right. Wow, this is amazing. It has danceability 0.362. Obviously, this song is amazing, but we cannot dance much on it. There is energy of the song, speechiness, acousticness, instrumentalness, and so on. There are a lot of features. There is a lot of analysis given about this particular song. The best part about this is that I am not sure how they performed all of these calculations. I can directly use this API and build an application on top of it. Let's say I want to query for some party songs. So I can check the danceability of it or the energy of the particular song and then create my party playlist. Now, when party comes to my mind, I think we can just take a look at some different song for which the danceability should be more. Let's search for that particular item. Now, Badtameez Dil is a very famous party song from Ye Jawani Hai Diwani. So this is the track. We can mention the market as India as well because I want to get a specific response. And let's try it out. I have got the output. What I'm looking for is the ID of this song. Yeah, here is the ID of the track which we can use in the audio analysis, audio features. Let's just paste the ID of that song. Amazing. So you can see the energy of the song also increased. It was around 0.3. Danceability was also around 0.3. It's 0.8 over here. And if we want to create a party playlist, we can just check, we can just create a threshold that if the danceability is greater than 0.8, then add this particular song to the playlist. So in this way, you can just create a new project or a new product or a new application using these APIs without having to reinvent the wheel again. Now this was about exploring the APIs online. How about we take this a step further and check how we can use this on the terminal. For this, I will just open my terminal. So we can see over here, it also gives us the curl request it used to fetch the response. So it has get, it has the URL which it is using. It's the request URL. Authorization, it mentions the entire bearer token. I don't mind sharing this bearer token with you because it's definitely going to get expired by the time you watch this tutorial. So let it be. I will just copy paste this entire thing and we can just see if we are getting the same response or not. Yes, we are getting the same response even with the curl request from our terminal. So if you see, there are a lot of other features which I don't really understand about songs, liveliness, valence, tempo and so on. Let's try out some other APIs on curl. Let's try out some ChatGPT API. What do you say? Okay, so over here it mentions, okay, I need to find out my API key from somewhere. Let's see where they are storing the API key. Now, instead of OpenAI API key, I need to add my key. Let's just find out where the key is stored for this. We will keep this empty for the time being. Can you let me know where the API key should have been stored? Okay. So if you look over here in my personal account, it says view API keys. So let's take a look what the API key is. So it says your secret API keys are listed below. Please note we do not display your secret API keys again after you regenerate them. So this is an amazing security feature because once the API key is generated and you have copied it, the entire secret key will not be exposed so that they can avoid any hacker to use it. So I definitely need to create a new API key because I don't remember what the previous API key was. Should we delete these keys? I guess yes. I can't delete this because there would be no API key, so let's create a new one. I will just copy these and let's see if it works. So don't use this API key because I'm going to delete it when you look at this video in the future. Okay. So with this particular example, what we are trying to do was we are trying to create a Python code. Okay, so there is a mistake over here which we missed out on. Let's go to the playground. This particular example already has the answer to it. It has a prompt as well as the completion. So we need to remove this particular completion and then find the new request. So if you take a look over here, the prompt says take 2 integer inputs from the user and return the product of them. It also includes the answer. So if the answer is already included, the API has nothing to do. So if you look over here, the text is empty. It contains nothing at all because the answer is already there in the prompt itself. So if you take a look at the prompt, it already contains the prompt, which is take two integer inputs from the user and return the product of them. It also contains the completed output, which is the Python code. So what we were looking for is just the question over here. So we need to remove the completion from this. And after removing the completion, we have got the proper prompt. We will just copy this request. Okay, now when we pasted the request, we lost the API key as well. So we might need to create it once again. Let's create a new API key. Okay, I think we can still copy it. This is wonderful. So if you see over here, in the previous output, there was no text. Text said it was empty. Now when you see over here, it returned the entire Python code in the form of a text. Within choices, the text previously was empty, and this time it is returning me the Python code. So in this way, we can use curl from your terminal to perform some API keys. What all stuff is important for this? The headers are really important because some of them contain the API key or the bearer token and so on. It contains the request URL which we are hitting. It contains some of the parameters which are important to perform the operation. Like we can change the temperature from here and get a different answer possibly. I'm not sure if increasing the temperature will take more risk and return me some new Python code, because the Python code should remain the same. So now we have seen how we can use curl to perform API request as well. It's the time for us to use a powerful master of performing API request, and it is Postman. So to those who don't know what Postman is, it's completely all right. It's a web offering. You can just download it on your Mac or your Linux machine. You can use it similar to curl. You can use it to hit some APIs and get some response from them. Now what I want is a web version of Postman. So we'll just sign in really quick. So if you see announcing Postman for web now in open beta, this means that they are also testing this in beta before launching it for everyone. This is a blog. What I need is the web Postman. So this is the UI of Postman. What we first need to do, you might need to sign up. If you have never used Postman earlier, you might need to sign up through Google or Facebook or using your email ID or mobile phone. Once you have signed up, you will see this screen. Probably by the time you watch this video, they might have updated some parts of the UI, but we need to create a new workspace. So let's create API tutorial. So let's add some summary as well. Workspace for API tutorial. And if you see the visibility, we can change it to personal because I don't want to share it with my team. We can create this workspace. And this is the new workspace in which I will be working. There is something known as collections. We can create a new collection. This collection is empty. We can start adding requests which we want to work with. Let's rename this to which API do we want to start with first. We can perhaps start with ChatGPT. We can just check how one request looks. And we can change this. Which example can we try out? Perhaps we can try out the grammatical correction one because the requests were a bit smaller. If we tried the summarization one, it would be really big. So grammar, we can just name it grammar. Let's take a look what the request was. We can just copy paste it from here. Yep, you can discard it. We can use the same request. We don't need to change it for this. Let's see what other things are. Let's move this tab over here. So first of all, we need to mention the HTTP verb which we are using. So let's just have a look at our curl code. So if I remember correctly, the completions API was using a post HTTP verb. We can mention this, yeah, it mentions over here post V1 completions. So the post verb is the one which we are looking for. And we can just copy this particular request URL. This is the request URL which curl uses. We can paste it over here in Postman as well. Now if you take a look, we can add params. There is something for authorization as well. We can add some of the headers. So all of these are headers, content type, authorization, these are headers because it mentions -h. Now -d is the data which we are adding to the request body. So we can just see where we can add. There are no parameters for this because we are going to use the body. We can just go to the raw part where we can copy paste the JSON body. Let's see if they provide the JSON body to us. I'm not sure. Yeah, there is JSON over here, so we can just copy it from this. I'm not sure if it's going to work or not. Let's just give it a shot. We have copy pasted the body. If you see, the header was 6 earlier, it changed to 7. These are hidden. If you see, the content type is mentioned, content length, and all of the other stuff is already added, so we don't need to work upon it. Let's change the authorization. Inherit auth from parent. We have not mentioned the auth in parent. So ours is possibly a bearer token. We can just have a look. Glad we didn't remove this API key from here. We can just copy paste it. Let's just try it out. Let's see what output it returns us. Okay. Body is present. Let's just compare with the curl request over here. We have mentioned the body. Header is there. Bearer token we copy pasted. We have added post as well. And we have also mentioned the request URL. So I think this should work, but this is software engineering. Things don't work as we want them to. So let's just see. Okay, it did work. I guess I was just pretty lucky with this. It worked in the first shot. So it returns us the output. If you see over here in choices, the completion is mentioned. She did not go to the market. So this was the completion. You can use Postman to explore some different APIs within ChatGPT. I would really love if you download the desktop version of Postman and try out some of the different examples that we did. You can do some translations as well, and you can use these APIs to create an application of yours. Let's say you want to create a translation application. You can use the translation API to send some request, get some response, and show it on your application. In this way, you can create some amazing applications which you can add to your resume so that you can uplift the value of your resume as well. This is brilliant. Now let's just try out some of the Spotify APIs. How can I add a new collection? Okay, create a new collection. We can change it to Spotify. Another typing mistake. Spotify. Now if you take a look, let's just go back one step. For security purpose, I just want to show you this thing. Over here in authorization, I have mentioned the token. So anyone can use this token. So instead of these, what we can do is we can set it. Over here, if you read, heads up, these parameters hold sensitive data. To keep this data secure while working in a collaborative environment, we recommend using variables. Learn more about variables over here. Let me just see if I can set this as a variable. Set as a variable. Okay. Over here, it shows me I can set this entire thing as a variable. Set as a new variable. I can name it as, this was ChatGPT. ChatGPT token. We can select a scope. We want it to be limited to the ChatGPT collection. So I'm not going to set it as global, and we can set the variable over here. Now if you see the token, earlier it was showing the token. Now it is showing in braces ChatGPT token. So let's look if the variable is set or not first of all. If I look at ChatGPT, in the variables section, in my ChatGPT token, the value of the token is already mentioned. So now if I go over here in my grammar request, in the authorization, either I can use a bearer token, or let's say if I inherit from auth, I'm not sure. Let's try it out, inherit from auth. We can mention authorization over here in the bearer token. Let's see if we can set the token. Okay, here it shows me ChatGPT token. I can possibly use this authorization. So instead of mentioning the token at all in this, we can inherit auth from parent. Let's see if we can hit the request again. The body should not change. You didn't provide an API key. Okay. Inherit auth from parent. Was it a bearer token? Okay, let's try API key out. Okay, key and value. Basic auth has username and password. It should have been bearer token itself. Let's try it out again, why it didn't work. So the authorization is there. We have mentioned the variables as well. So if we look over here, it says this request is using bearer token from collection ChatGPT. Earlier it was saying it was using no auth because we didn't save the particular ChatGPT collection. So now we can try to resend this particular query, and we can see we now start to get the output. So you can use inherit auth from parent so that we avoid exposing the bearer token altogether. Now let's move quickly to one example from Spotify as well. Which example are you interested in? Let's try the search one out. We'll try to search for an item. So let's just copy the request URL from here. Let's move the tab again. Okay, this is our request URL. Let's just rename it. Search item. Now if you remember, this is a search request. Okay, so the data mentioned over here is in the form of parameters and not request body. So what we will do is, let's start adding some of the parameters and see how we can add it in Postman. Now these are 3 parameters that I want to add to my request. So I can just add q is equal to quinfia. Let's just start adding the parameters. Next was type, if I remember it correctly, and the last one was market. So if you see over here in the request URL, it's getting updated. It added all the keys q, type and market. Let's see if I start adding the value. So if you look over here, the request, it's showing kun space fia. If you remember correctly, I mentioned if we are going to use it in curl, we need to encode it to %20 so that the request reflects it correctly. Type is track and market is India. Authorization, inherit from parent. Let's use the same thing. Let's try to add the Spotify key in the parent itself. How can we get this Spotify key? It's already over here. We can just copy it. It should also be a bearer token. And in the variables, we'll mention Spotify key. I need to paste it again. It's copied it. So now we have set the token as a variable over here and we are using that in authorization. Let's just save it so we don't get the unauthorized error again. We have mentioned in the params, our headers are using the authorization token. In the authorization inherit from parent, it says this request is using bearer token from collection Spotify. Let's just give it a shot and see what it returns. We are getting the result. It gives us the same result that we are getting on the console and the curl request from the terminal. This is amazing. So in this way, you can use Postman to interact with different APIs as well. I have an amazing assignment for all of you. Let me just go back to the API documentation. So what I want all of you to do is play around with the playlist. Try to create a new playlist. You can use this particular API to create a new playlist. Over here in the post request, it says user ID. So now how can you get a user ID? You can possibly, I'm not sure if search should return the user ID or not. Okay, over here in the user's profile, it says get current user's profile. So perhaps you can use this endpoint to get your user ID. Then in the playlist, you can create a playlist. Then you can identify a song which you want to add in the playlist, and then use update playlist item perhaps, or add items to the playlist to add that particular song to the playlist, and then check in your mobile phone if the playlist that you created is there or not, and the item or the track that you added to the particular playlist is present or not. This is going to be a very fun experiment, fun example for you to experience how you can use APIs to interact with the application as well. So students, I'm sure you would have thoroughly enjoyed this entire journey. We started from understanding what APIs are, what is remote API, what is non-remote API. Then we moved to exploring the APIs on the internet. We tried it out on the console. We tried out on the terminal as well using the curl command. Then ultimately we tried it out on Postman, how you can interact with the APIs. But don't forget to check out free masterclass taken by some of the leading industry experts if you want to continue learning such amazing technical content only on Scalar's event page. Link is in the description below. So I am sure you are going to do the assignments that I have given to you. If you face any difficulties, put it down in the comment section. Ultimately, if you loved this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, subscribe to Scalar's YouTube channel, and finally, if you want to keep receiving notifications for such content, hit the bell icon.